Well, America's prison population is at a tipping point. 19 News uncovering new numbers showing fewer people are under prison supervision, but doesn't mean there are fewer people behind bars. 19 investigates. Gabby Hart live now to break down the data. Gabby.
Well, correctional supervision just refers to the different ways that people in the criminal justice system are monitored. That could be within the community, on parole or probation, or behind bars. And I found new data that shows a significant shift in our nation's correctional system. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the number of adults under supervision, including probation, parole, and incarceration, has declined for the 15th year in a row at that. But the overall picture is a bit more complicated because there has been an uptick in the number of people behind bars. More than 2/3 of offenders are not behind bars, but instead monitored within their communities. But the number of people in jails and prisons increased by 3% in the last year. And most of that growth is happening in local jails. Yeah, now this latest report really confirms a long-term decline in probation numbers, but it also highlights a growing concern over rising jail populations across the country. That full report breaks down the data by race and gender, and we do have a link to it on our website, cleveland19.com. Brian?